You sit in the dark. Your breath slows. Your eyes are closed, but something behind them is moving. This is not meditation in the modern, casual sense. This is older, much older. That exact breath pattern, 4 counts in, a held pause, 8 counts out, appears almost word for word in a collection of Greek manuscripts now known as the Greek Magical Papyri, copied by hand in Egypt somewhere between the 2nd and 5th centuries. Practitioners across different traditions called the technique by different names. The goal was always the same. Step outside ordinary waking consciousness. Enter a state ancient writers simply called gnosis. Direct knowing, not belief. How did they actually do it? Not with incense alone, not with chanting alone. The real method was structural, built in stages, and shockingly consistent across cultures that never made contact with each other. Start with the body. Before any vision, before any sense of presence in the room, the practitioner had to exhaust the nervous system's normal vigilance. Fasting, sleep restriction, repetitive, monotonous movement. The Hesychast monks of the Byzantine Christian tradition, whose methods were later collected in a text called the Philocalia, sat motionless for hours, chin tucked to chest, repeating a single short phrase in time with the heartbeat. Thousands of miles east, and centuries earlier, certain branches of Tantra used controlled breath retention, what practitioners called pranayama, toward the exact same end. Slow the breath until ordinary thought has nowhere left to attach itself. Why does slowing the breath do anything at all? Here the historical record and modern neuroscience start to agree in an uncomfortable way. Reducing breath rate raises carbon dioxide tolerance and shifts brainwave activity away from busy, alert beta patterns and towards slower theta rhythms. That same theta state shows up in hypnagogia, the drowsy threshold between waking and sleep where imagery turns vivid and uncontrolled. The ancient practitioner was not tuning into some supernatural frequency. He was deliberately engineering the same neurological doorway your brain opens every single night, right before you fall asleep, and then training himself to stay conscious while standing inside it. The second stage was sensory narrowing, a single point of focus, one flame, one symbol, one repeated word. The Sefer Yetzirah, an early Kabbalistic text whose exact origin scholars still debate, instructs the reader to combine and recombine the letters of the Hebrew alphabet in the mind, turning them over until the letters themselves seem to move on their own. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is a precise description of what happens when a mind fixates on a single repeating pattern long enough that the visual cortex begins generating motion the eyes are not actually seeing. You have felt a milder version of this yourself. Stare at anything long enough. A candle flame, a ceiling fan, a flickering screen, and your mind drifts, distorts, slips sideways. Modern neuroscience has its own name for part of this process. Sustained, narrow focus appears to quiet activity in what researchers call the default mode network. The background system tied to self-referential thought. The constant inner narration of who you are and what you should be doing next. Quiet that network long enough and the felt boundary between self and surroundings genuinely softens. The ancient practitioner had no scanner and no name for this network.
Who am I?
He simply built a method, through trial and repetition across generations, that reliably produced the same internal shift a modern researcher can now watch unfold on a screen. Cross-tradition confirmation makes the pattern harder to dismiss as coincidence. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, composed in classical India centuries before any contact with Egypt or Byzantium, describe a near-identical sequence: withdrawal of the senses, one-pointed concentration, and finally a state of absorption where subject and object of focus seem to merge. 3 traditions, 3 continents, no shared lineage, and yet the same architecture appears again and again. Withdraw the senses, narrow the focus, hold until something gives way. The third stage was expectation. This is the part historians of religion kept returning to. Mircea Eliade, in his landmark study of shamanic ecstasy across dozens of cultures, noted that the practitioner never entered the ritual space neutral. He entered already primed, already told, by elders or teachers, exactly what he was about to experience, surrounded by symbols that rehearsed the coming vision long before it arrived. A shaman preparing for spirit flight had heard the elders describe spirit flight his entire life. A hermetic initiate working through Picatrix. The medieval grimoire of astrological magic translated and circulated across Europe from Arabic sources. Had already absorbed its cosmology of planetary spirits before he ever lit the prescribed candle. Expectation did not fake the experience. It built the scaffolding the experience would later climb. So let's reconstruct what an actual initiate did. Step by step, the way the primary sources describe it. He fasted for a day, sometimes longer, weakening the body's normal alertness. At dusk he entered a space stripped of distraction. Bare walls, a single flame, sometimes total darkness. He took his seat and began the breath. Slow, counted, deliberate, exactly as his teacher or his text instructed. He fixed his attention on one object. A sigil, a divine name, the candle's flame, and held it there far longer than comfort allowed, letting ordinary thought exhaust itself against the boredom. And he had already been told, in careful detail, by tradition and teacher alike, what waiting at that threshold might feel like. So when the room seemed to tilt, when the symbol seemed to breathe, when a presence seemed to enter the space, his mind already had somewhere to put the experience. Not hallucination in the dismissive modern sense. A trained alteration of attention, engineered with the same care a modern clinician uses to guide a patient into hypnosis. Often a single trusted figure stood near him through the process, not performing the trance but guiding it, pacing the breath count aloud, naming the symbol again at the moment attention started to wander. This is not so different from the role a modern hypnotherapist plays, holding a subject's attention steady through a slow, repeated verbal cue while the subject's own mind does the actual work of shifting state. Here is the counterintuitive twist almost nobody tells you. Trance was never really about contacting something outside the self. Even practitioners who described it in supernatural language were, in practice, running a precise technology for narrowing attention until the boundary between observer and observed wore thin enough to see through. Aleister Crowley, in his technical manual Liber Abba, was explicit about this, describing the trance states of ceremonial magic less as literal encounters with spirits and more as deliberate alterations of consciousness, used to access material the ordinary, distracted mind cannot reach on its own. Israel Regardie, who trained inside that same magical lineage and later became a practicing psychotherapist, made the connection even more directly. In his clinical view, the rituals worked because they functioned as a structured form of psychological integration. Dressed in symbol because symbol is the language the mind actually responds to. This is not a debunking. If anything, it's more impressive than the supernatural version. These were not naive people stumbling accidentally into hallucination. Across centuries of trial, error, and careful transmission, they had mapped a working method for deliberately shifting brain state, without instruments, without chemistry in most of these traditions, using nothing but breath, fixation, fasting, and expectation. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, writing his 3 books of occult philosophy in the 16th century, organized this same body of technique into a systematic framework long before anyone had the vocabulary of neuroscience to explain why any of it worked. He just knew, from direct transmission and direct experience, that it did. And you are not as far from this as you think. That heavy-eyed drift right before sleep, when a half-formed thought suddenly feels strange and vivid, that's the same threshold the Hesychast monk and the tantric practitioner and the hermetic initiate were all reaching for on purpose. The dull, hypnotic pull of staring at a long red light, waiting for it to change, slowly dissolving into something closer to daydream. That's sensory narrowing doing exactly what it did in a candlelit room 2,000 years ago. Even the strange, dissociated calm some people describe during long-distance running, mile after repetitive mile, mirrors the same mechanism the Greek Magical Papyri were quietly describing in a different vocabulary. The trance-like absorption a musician describes losing themselves inside a long, repeated passage runs on the very same narrowing of attention. Minus the candle and the robe, your nervous system still runs on the same hardware it always has. The only real difference is whether anyone is operating it on purpose. You sit in the dark. Your breath slows, and this time you know exactly what's moving behind your closed eyes. Because it was never a spirit waiting in the room with you. It was always just you, finally quiet enough to notice yourself.